The day an alpha discovered the family he abandoned was standing 3 feet in front of him, the world finally stopped making sense. Ethan Caldwell had faced billion-dollar negotiations, impossible deadlines, and boardrooms filled with people waiting for him to fail, but nothing prepared him for the sight waiting outside the small community arts center on a quiet Saturday morning. He had walked in expecting a routine meeting about a new charity partnership. He left the entrance frozen in place, unable to move, unable to speak. Because there was Adrian Brooks, the Omega he had not seen in 1 year. The person whose name he had tried to bury beneath work, pride, and excuses. But Adrian was not alone. Beside him was a stroller. Not an ordinary stroller. A wide triple stroller holding 3 tiny children wrapped in soft blankets, their curious eyes watching the world with innocent wonder. Ethan felt something inside him shift. The confident alpha who always had an answer suddenly had none. The children looked at him with a familiarity he could not explain, and then one of them reached toward him as if recognizing someone they had never met. His hand tightened around the folder he was carrying. For the first time in years, Ethan Caldwell forgot how to breathe. 1 year earlier, everything had been different. Adrian had been the person who made quiet moments feel meaningful. He had a way of finding beauty in simple things, whether it was a rainy afternoon, a cup of coffee shared after work, or a forgotten sketch left on a kitchen table. Ethan had always admired that warmth, even when he pretended he did not understand it. He was a man built on control, schedules, expectations, rules. Adrian was everything Ethan was not. Gentle where Ethan was guarded, open where Ethan was careful, and somehow, that difference had made them impossible to ignore. But when life changed overnight, Ethan let fear speak louder than his heart. He had said words he could never take back, words that left a wound deeper than any argument. Adrian had walked away carrying a secret and a pain Ethan never bothered to understand. Now, standing in front of that triple stroller, Ethan finally saw the truth he had spent a year avoiding. Adrian had not been trying to take anything from him. He had been building a life while Ethan was running away from one. Adrian looked at him quietly, his expression calm but unreadable. There was no anger in his eyes. Somehow, that made it harder. Anger would have been easier. Anger meant there was still a wall to fight against. But silence meant Ethan had to face himself. The man who believed he could solve every problem with money, logic, and determination suddenly faced the one thing he could not control, the consequences of his own choices. And as the morning sunlight fell across the sidewalk, Ethan realized the greatest loss of his life had never been a business deal or a failed opportunity. It was the family standing right in front of him, waiting for him to finally understand what he had almost lost forever. Ethan could not remember the last time his heart had felt this heavy. The man who had spent years making decisions in seconds now stood silently outside the art center, watching Adrian hold a life Ethan never knew existed. The memories he had tried to lock away came rushing back, not like a storm, but like a quiet song he had forgotten he loved. A year earlier, Adrian Brooks had been the only person who could see beyond Ethan Caldwell's perfect suit, polished reputation, and carefully controlled image. Everyone else saw the successful alpha who built a company from nothing. Adrian saw the tired man who stayed late at the office because he was afraid of disappointing people. He saw the person behind the title. That was what made Ethan feel safe, and that was also what terrified him. When everything changed, Ethan did what he always did when emotions became too difficult. He built a wall. He convinced himself that distance was easier than facing uncertainty. He told himself that Adrian had made choices without considering the consequences. He believed the story he created because the truth was harder to accept. The truth was that he was afraid. Afraid of becoming responsible for something bigger than his career. Afraid of admitting that Adrian mattered more than anything he had planned for himself. Adrian had not argued. He had not begged. That was the part Ethan remembered most clearly. Adrian simply looked at him with a quiet sadness and said that he hoped Ethan would someday understand what he had lost. At the time, Ethan thought those words were dramatic. Now, standing beside the sidewalk outside the art center, they felt like a warning he had ignored. Adrian noticed him watching and slowly walked closer. The distance between them was only a few steps, but Ethan felt like he was crossing an entire year of regret. "You came here for the partnership meeting," Adrian said softly. His voice was calm, almost too calm. Ethan nodded, but he could not stop looking at the stroller beside him. "I did not know," Ethan finally said. The words sounded small compared to everything he had left unsaid. Adrian looked away for a moment. "I know." That simple answer hurt more than anger would have. Ethan wanted Adrian to blame him. He wanted a chance to defend himself, to explain, to prove that he had reasons. But Adrian did not need explanations. He had lived through the days Ethan had missed. He had carried responsibilities Ethan never knew about. Ethan looked at the three children sleeping peacefully, unaware of the complicated history between the adults standing nearby. For the first time, he wondered how many moments he had already missed. First smiles, first steps, first laughs, memories that could never be recreated. Adrian noticed the expression on Ethan's face and quietly said, "They have a good life." Ethan looked at him. "Because of you?" Adrian gave a small smile. "Because I chose to keep moving forward." Those words stayed with Ethan. Adrian had not waited for him to return. He had built something beautiful without him. And now Ethan had to face the hardest truth of all. He was not walking back into a place that had been waiting for him. He was standing at the edge of a life that had continued without him. Adrian Brooks had learned that silence could be louder than any argument. For 1 year, he had filled his days with small moments that no one else saw. The early mornings when three little voices needed him at the same time. The afternoons spent organizing art supplies while balancing a child on his hip. The late nights when the apartment finally became quiet, and he could sit alone with a cup of coffee, wondering how different everything might have been if Ethan had chosen differently. But Adrian had stopped asking that question. He had learned that some doors only hurt when you kept trying to open them. His life was not perfect. Far from it. There were days when he forgot where he left his keys because he was too busy remembering which bottle belonged to which baby. There were mornings when his coffee went cold before he took the first sip. There were moments when he felt completely exhausted. Yet every time one of his children smiled at him, every time tiny hands reached for him, every time he heard their laughter fill the apartment, Adrian remembered that he had built something worth protecting. The community art center had become his second home. The old brick building with colorful paintings on the walls was where Adrian taught children how to create, imagine, and believe in their own ideas. It was also the place where he had slowly rebuilt himself. His friends knew him as the patient artist who always stayed late to help someone finish a project. They knew him as the father who carried snacks, extra blankets, and emergency toys everywhere he went. They did not know the full story behind his quiet moments. They did not know there was a time when Adrian wondered if he would ever feel whole again. Ethan Caldwell had been a chapter of his life that ended without a proper goodbye. Or at least, that was what Adrian told himself. Seeing Ethan again changed something. Not because Adrian suddenly forgot everything. Not because one conversation could erase a year of disappointment. But because Ethan looked different. The confident alpha who once seemed impossible to reach now looked like someone searching for answers he was afraid to hear. That was the part Adrian did not expect. He expected anger. He expected excuses. He expected Ethan to walk in with the same certainty he always carried. Instead, he saw someone who looked lost. After Ethan left the art center that afternoon, Adrian stood by the window and watched him disappear down the street. One of his children made a small sound from the stroller, bringing Adrian back to the present. He looked down and smiled gently. "I know," he whispered. "Everything is changing again." Adrian knew Ethan would probably come back with questions. He knew there would be conversations he could not avoid forever. The past had returned, and this time Adrian could not simply walk away. But he also knew something Ethan did not. A year ago, Adrian had been waiting for someone to choose him. Now, he had already chosen himself. And anyone who wanted a place in his life would have to understand that love was no longer something he begged for. It was something that had to be earned. Ethan Caldwell had always believed that understanding a problem meant finding the missing information. At work, it was simple. A company struggling with growth needed a new strategy. A difficult negotiation needed patience. A complicated decision needed careful analysis. Everything had a solution if he looked closely enough. But Adrian was not a business problem. Their past was not a puzzle he could solve with logic. It was a year of memories, emotions, and moments he could never get back. After leaving the art center, Ethan returned to his office, but found himself unable to focus. The city outside his window moved like it always did, full of people rushing toward their next destination. But Ethan felt completely still. His assistant placed several documents on his desk, and asked about the afternoon meeting. Ethan answered automatically, but his mind was somewhere else. It was with three small faces looking at him from a stroller. It was with Adrian's quiet voice saying that he had chosen to move forward. For the first time, Ethan realized he knew almost nothing about the life Adrian had built. He knew the company reports of hundreds of employees. He knew market trends and financial forecasts. Yet he did not know Adrian's favorite coffee shop anymore. He did not know what songs made him smile. He did not know how many nights Adrian spent awake taking care of their children. That realization stayed with him. Ethan opened the drawer of his desk and found something he had kept for a year. A small sketch Adrian had drawn during one of their earlier conversations. It was a simple picture of a house surrounded by trees, with small details that showed warmth and comfort. Ethan remembered asking why Adrian drew places like that. Adrian had smiled and said, "Because everyone deserves somewhere they feel they belong." At the time, Ethan had not understood. Now he did. Adrian had not wanted his money. He had not wanted his reputation. He had wanted a place where he felt chosen. And Ethan had been the person who made him feel the opposite. The next morning, Ethan returned to the community arts center. He did not arrive with a business proposal or a carefully prepared speech. For once, he came without a plan. Adrian looked surprised when he saw him standing at the door. "You are back," Adrian said. Ethan nodded slowly. "I need to talk." Adrian looked at him for a moment before answering. "About what?" Ethan glanced toward the room where children were creating artwork, their laughter filling the space. "About everything I did not understand before." Adrian remained quiet. Ethan knew that silence. It was not rejection. It was a reminder that words alone were not enough. "I spent a year thinking I was protecting myself," Ethan said. "But I was only running away." Adrian looked down at the papers in his hand, then back at Ethan. "Why now?" The question was simple, but Ethan felt the weight behind it. Why now? Why after a year? Why after Adrian had already learned how to live without him? Ethan took a breath. "Because I saw what I almost lost." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The room around them continued moving, children painting, people talking, life continuing as normal. But between Ethan and Adrian, something had changed. The past was still there. The hurt was still there. But for the first time, Ethan was not trying to defend himself. He was finally ready to listen. Ethan Caldwell had spent his entire life believing that the hardest moments required the strongest version of himself. Stay calm. Stay focused. Never let anyone see uncertainty. Those rules had helped him become successful, but they had also made him blind to the one person who never asked him to be perfect. Adrian Brooks had never wanted the powerful alpha everyone else admired. He had wanted Ethan, the man behind the achievements and the carefully controlled expression. Now, standing inside the Quiet Arts Center, Ethan finally understood that he had spent a year protecting a version of himself that no longer existed. Adrian watched him carefully as he stepped farther into the room. There was a difference between forgiving someone and trusting them again. Adrian knew that better than anyone. "You said you wanted to talk," Adrian said. "So talk." Ethan looked down for a moment. Usually, he would have prepared every sentence before speaking. He would have chosen the perfect words, removed every weakness, and delivered a statement that sounded confident. But this time, confidence was not what he needed. Honesty was. "I was wrong," Ethan said quietly. Adrian did not react immediately. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything Ethan had avoided. "I spent months telling myself that I was protecting my future," Ethan continued. "But I was really protecting my pride." Adrian looked away, focusing on the children painting at a nearby table. Their laughter filled the room, creating a warmth that made Ethan realize how much life had continued while he was stuck in the past. "Do you know what hurt the most?" Adrian asked. Ethan looked at him. "It was not that you left. It was that you made me feel like I was the problem." The sentence landed harder than Ethan expected. He remembered that day clearly now. He remembered Adrian's expression. He remembered how quickly he had chosen fear over understanding. At the time, Ethan thought he was defending himself. Now he realized he had pushed away the person who had trusted him most. "I cannot change what I said," Ethan replied. "I cannot erase that year. I cannot give you back the moments I missed." His voice became quieter. "But I want to understand." Adrian studied him. "Understand what?" Ethan looked toward the stroller near the window. "Everything. Their routines. Their favorite things. The little moments I was not there for." Adrian's expression softened. Slightly. But he did not look away from the truth. You think showing up once fixes everything? No. Ethan answered immediately. I know it does not. That answer surprised Adrian. There was no argument. No attempt to convince him that one apology solved a year of disappointment. Just acceptance. Ethan took a slow breath. I am not asking you to forget. I am asking for the chance to prove I can do better. For a moment, Adrian said nothing. The old version of Ethan would have filled the silence. He would have explained, defended, and tried to control the outcome. But this time he waited. Finally, Adrian nodded slightly. Then start by listening. Ethan looked at him. Okay. And for the first time in a long time, the distance between them did not feel impossible. It felt like something that could slowly be crossed, one honest moment at a time. Ethan Caldwell quickly learned that being present was much harder than making promises. For years, he had believed responsibility was measured by results. A successful company, a strong reputation, a perfect image. But spending time with Adrian and the children showed him something he had never considered before. The most important moments in life were not the ones that appeared in reports or business meetings. They were the small moments that disappeared if you were not there to experience them. At first, Ethan felt like a stranger in a world that should have belonged to him. He stood near the doorway of Adrian's apartment, holding a small bag of groceries, unsure if he should knock again or leave. It was strange. He had walked into crowded conference rooms without hesitation, but standing outside Adrian's home made him nervous. When the door opened, Adrian looked surprised. You brought groceries? Adrian asked. Ethan nodded. I asked what the children needed. Adrian looked at the bag, then back at him. You asked? The simple question reminded Ethan that he had spent so much time assuming he knew what was best. He had forgotten that trust was built through effort, not confidence. I am trying to learn, Ethan said. Adrian stepped aside and let him enter. It was a small gesture, but Ethan understood its meaning. He was not being welcomed back into the past. He was being given a chance to become part of the present. Inside, the apartment felt completely different from Ethan's carefully designed home. There were colorful drawings on the refrigerator, small toys arranged in every corner, blankets folded on the couch. It was not perfect. It was real. Ethan watched Adrian move through the room with natural patience. He knew where everything was. He knew every little routine. He knew when one child needed attention and when another simply wanted to be held. Ethan felt something unexpected. Not jealousy, not sadness, respect. Adrian had carried an entire world on his own. How did you do this? Ethan asked quietly. Adrian looked confused. Do what? Ethan looked around the apartment. Everything. Adrian smiled faintly. I just did what needed to be done. That answer stayed with Ethan. Adrian did not see himself as someone extraordinary. He simply loved his children and kept moving forward. Later that evening, Ethan sat nearby while Adrian explained the children's daily routines. Their favorite foods, their favorite stories, the little sounds they made when they were happy. Every detail felt important to Ethan because every detail was something he had missed. I should have known these things, Ethan whispered. Adrian became quiet. You cannot change the past. Ethan nodded. I know. A pause followed. Then he added, but I can stop missing the future. Adrian looked at him carefully. There was still uncertainty between them. There were still memories that needed healing. But for the first time, Ethan was not asking Adrian to make things easier for him. He was willing to do the difficult work himself. Before leaving that night, Ethan stood by the door and looked back at the small family he almost never knew. A year ago, he thought losing control meant losing everything. Now he understood something different. Sometimes, the greatest mistake was not losing control. Sometimes, it was refusing to open your heart when someone was asking you to stay. Ethan Caldwell had spent his entire life believing that strength meant never needing anyone. He had built his identity around independence, around being the person others could rely on. But now, sitting on the floor of Adrian's apartment, while one of his children carefully placed a small toy in his hand, Ethan discovered a different kind of strength. It was not found in control. It was found in connection. At first, Ethan did not know what to do. He was used to solving problems with strategies and decisions, not with patience and gentle conversations. The children did not care about his company, his reputation, or the name written on the front of his office building. They only cared about the person sitting in front of them. And somehow, that made Ethan feel more nervous than any important meeting ever had. You are doing fine, Adrian said from across the room. Ethan looked up. I do not feel like I am. Adrian smiled slightly. That is because you are trying too hard to be perfect. The words surprised Ethan because they sounded exactly like something Adrian would have said a year ago. Back then, Ethan would have ignored them. Now he listened. He looked down at the child beside him and realized that this tiny moment mattered more than any achievement he had chased. A few days passed, and Ethan continued showing up. Not with expensive gifts. Not with grand promises. Just with time. He learned which stories made the children laugh. He learned which snacks Adrian kept in the kitchen. He learned that mornings were always chaotic and that someone always lost a favorite toy right before leaving the apartment. Those small details became important to him because they were pieces of a life he had almost never known. Adrian noticed the change, even if he did not say much. The Ethan who first returned had been searching for forgiveness. The Ethan standing there now was learning how to earn trust. One evening, after the children had fallen asleep, Ethan and Adrian sat quietly in the living room. The silence between them felt different. It was not uncomfortable anymore. It was a space where they could finally be honest. I keep thinking about that day, Ethan said. Adrian looked at him. Which day? Ethan lowered his eyes. The day I hurt you with my words. Adrian remained quiet. Ethan continued. I wanted to believe I was right because admitting I was wrong meant accepting that I failed you. His voice became softer. And I hate that I made you feel alone. Adrian looked away, remembering everything he had carried during that year. The uncertainty, the fear, the moments when he wondered if Ethan would ever care. I needed you to believe me, Adrian said. Ethan nodded slowly. I know. A long silence followed. Then Ethan said something Adrian never expected to hear. I do not want to be the person who only shows up after losing something. Adrian looked at him. Ethan continued. I want to be someone who stays. For the first time, Adrian saw no pride in Ethan's expression. No attempt to protect his image. Just a man admitting his mistakes and choosing to become better. The journey was not finished. There were still things they needed to talk about. There were still moments from the past that needed healing. But that night, something important changed. Ethan was no longer trying to return to the family he had missed. He was finally beginning to build a place inside it. Ethan Caldwell discovered that rebuilding trust was not about one perfect apology. It was not about saying the right words at the right moment. It was about showing up again and again, even when the other person was still afraid to believe him. For someone like Ethan, that lesson was harder than any challenge he had faced before. He had spent years becoming a man who always knew what to do. Now he was learning how to be a man who simply stayed. Weeks passed, and his presence slowly became part of Adrian's daily life. Ethan started arriving after work instead of disappearing into endless meetings. He learned that the children had different personalities, different little habits, and different ways of showing happiness. One loved listening to stories before bedtime. Another always reached for colorful toys. The third seemed determined to explore every corner of the apartment with endless curiosity. Ethan noticed everything. The small smiles. The quiet moments. The ways Adrian carried the responsibilities that had once seemed invisible to him. One evening, Ethan found Adrian sitting at the kitchen table, organizing old photographs. The room was quiet except for the soft sound of pages turning. Ethan sat across from him and noticed a picture from a year earlier. Adrian looked younger in the photo, not because much time had passed, but because the weight he carried had changed him. You looked happy, Ethan said softly. Adrian looked at the picture. I was trying to be. Ethan felt the meaning behind those words. Adrian had created happiness because he had no other choice. He had built a home, raised 3 children, and continued moving forward even when the person he once trusted was gone. I wish I could have seen this part of your life, Ethan said. Adrian looked at him. You could have. The honesty of that answer stayed in the air. Ethan nodded because he knew there was nothing he could say to make that truth disappear. I know. For once, Ethan did not defend himself. He did not explain his fears or talk about his intentions. He simply accepted the pain he had caused. Adrian looked at him for a long moment. Do you really understand what you are asking for? Ethan answered carefully. I think I am finally starting to. Adrian waited. Ethan continued. I am not asking you to pretend nothing happened. I am not asking you to trust me immediately. I just want the chance to prove that I can be someone you and the children can depend on. Adrian looked down, his expression softer but still cautious. Trust takes time. Ethan nodded. Then I will give it time. That answer mattered because it was different from the Ethan Adrian remembered. The old Ethan wanted solutions. He wanted things fixed quickly. This Ethan understood that some things could only be healed slowly. Later that night, as Ethan prepared to leave, one of the children reached toward him before he walked out. It was a small gesture, almost nothing, but Ethan stopped completely. He smiled and gently held the tiny hand. In that moment, he realized something important. He was no longer trying to prove he deserved a place in their lives. He was grateful for every moment he was allowed to have. And for the first time, Ethan understood that love was not about claiming something as yours. It was about choosing it, protecting it, and never walking away again. 1 year ago, Ethan Caldwell believed losing control was his greatest fear. Today, he understood something much more important. The greatest fear was losing the people who made life meaningful and realizing too late that they had already moved on. The days that followed were not perfect. They were not a magical solution to everything that happened between Ethan and Adrian. But they were real. And for the first time, real was enough. Ethan continued showing up. Not because he wanted to prove something. Not because he wanted praise. He simply wanted to be there. He became part of the small routines that Adrian had created. Morning walks. Quiet dinners. Simple conversations after the children were asleep. Moments that seemed ordinary to everyone else became priceless to Ethan. He had spent years chasing extraordinary achievements, only to discover that happiness often lived in the smallest details. One afternoon, Adrian brought the children to the community art center for a family event. The building was filled with laughter, colorful paintings, and the sound of people creating something together. Ethan stood near the entrance, watching Adrian help the children choose their favorite colors. There was a peacefulness in the scene that Ethan never wanted to lose again. A year ago, he thought family meant something that could be planned and controlled. Now he knew family was something built every day through patience, care, and choice. Adrian noticed Ethan watching and walked over. "You seem different," Adrian said. Ethan smiled slightly. "I am different." Adrian looked at him, waiting. Ethan took a moment before speaking. "I used to think being strong meant never admitting I was wrong. I thought if I stayed confident enough, I could avoid feeling hurt." He looked toward the children. "But I was wrong. Strength is admitting when someone matters more than your pride." Adrian was quiet. The old pain between them had not disappeared completely. Some memories would always be part of their story, but they no longer controlled the future. "I cannot promise that everything will be easy," Adrian said. Ethan nodded. "I do not need easy." That answer made Adrian smile. Because for the first time, Ethan was not asking for a perfect ending. He was asking for a real one. Later that evening, they walked home together. Ethan pushed the stroller while Adrian walked beside him. The street was calm, the sky painted with the soft colors of sunset. To anyone passing by, they looked like an ordinary family enjoying a peaceful evening. But Ethan knew how extraordinary that moment truly was. He remembered the man he had been before. A man who believed emotions were distractions. A man who thought distance protected him. A man who almost walked away from the greatest gift he had ever received. Now he understood. Love was not about being perfect. It was not about never making mistakes. It was about having the courage to return, the humility to change, and the patience to rebuild what was broken. Adrian looked at him and smiled. Ethan smiled back. The road ahead was still long. There would still be conversations, challenges, and moments that required understanding. But this time, Ethan would not run. He would stay, because the family he once failed to recognize had become the home he never knew he needed.